Good afternoon, Mayor. I have promoted you to panelist.
Great, I feel honored. Thank you.
And we are still waiting. Oh, here's Chris Rogers. Good afternoon, Councilmember Rogers. I have promoted you to panelist. If you'd like to turn your, oh, perfect. And Mayor, would you like to turn your video on as well, please?
Yeah, I'll begin in 1 sec.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So Callie, are you going to be the host for this meeting?
Yes, I am.
Okay, are you ready to roll?
I'm ready if you are.
Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. Could we please have a roll call?
Yes. Mayor Schwedhelm?
Here.
Councilmember Dowd?
Here.
Councilmember Rogers?
Here.
Let the record reflect that all members are present.
Great. We have no announcements, and then we have approval of the meeting minutes from January 29th. I noticed on that draft, it lists Julie Combs as being in attendance, and I don't think she was there.
That's my recollection as well. That it says down a couple of items later, I commented on public comments, but it doesn't show me as an attendant of the meeting. So I think there's a typo in there.
Thank you. We'll get that fixed. And we can probably approve it with that change if you're okay with that.
Yes, and one other thing too, Mr. Gillen, if you could just let IT know, I tried to look at the video just to confirm what I believe it be the case, and apparently the link's not working off that website. So, Mr. Dowd or Rogers, do you have any other adjustments to the minutes? Okay, we will accept them with that one change. Thank you. All right, now we have public comments for items not on the agenda. And Madam Host, are you going to be facilitating this?
Yes, I will be.
Okay. Please go ahead.
Perfect. We are now taking public comments on item 4, public comments on non-agenda items. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you are dialing in via telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. A countdown timer will appear for the convenience of the speaker and viewers. The first speaker will be acknowledged and invited to speak when the countdown begins. Please make sure to unmute yourself when you are invited to do so. Your microphone will be muted at the end of the countdown. If you have made a live public comment on this item and you have also submitted an email public comment, your pre-meeting public comment will not be read or played into the record. Good afternoon, Kevin. I have unmuted your microphone.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
I can. Just one moment. Let me get the timer. Can you confirm you see the timer on your screen?
I do, yes.
Perfect. All right. If you can please state your name for the record if you so choose, and your time will begin now.
Thank you. My name is Kevin Conway, and I appreciate this opportunity to make some comments. First of all, thank you very much for meeting again. That's really exciting to see the Climate Action Subcommittee meeting. I would be making my comments under section 5.4 of the agenda tonight, but I just got a call from Kaiser. They're scheduled me for a medical appointment at 5, so I'm going to make my comments now. I'm hoping that the city can make a substantive commitment, both energetically and financially, to supporting the Sonoma County 2030 climate emergency strategy that's being
weather flow conditions at the plant. So after a number of pre-design and alternatives analyses, we executed a design contract with Carollo Engineers in January of 2016. Later in 2016, we pre-selected Calgon Carbon as our UV equipment supplier for this project, which was done through a competitive procurement process. We subsequently executed an MOU and a PSA with this supplier. And shortly after this, we performed a value engineering study, which took our preferred alternative and compared it against a number of other alternatives, looking at design criteria, operational parameters, and regulatory requirements, and what the overall cost was for a number of alternatives. We're essentially looking to ensure that the preferred direction that we were headed with design was of best value to the city, and that was done in the most technically feasible manner. This did have somewhat of an impact on the delivery of the overall design project and resulted in some delays, which we had spoken about last year when we sought an amendment to the project work order for design services. And so the MOU that we previously entered into had a provision that prevented price escalation for a period of 18 months after execution. And so that MOU has essentially since expired, which is why we're here seeking or essentially discussing the new MOU and the new PSA as a result. So we went through a pre-selection process because the major UV equipment suppliers all have completely different physical requirements, which must be incorporated into the design. And you can see that with the images to the left there. So these varying requirements include channel geometry, flow hydraulics, as well as instrumentations and controls. And so pre-selection is required to implement this equipment into the overall design for a project to be constructed. So we ultimately identified 4 major UV equipment suppliers. We conducted various site visits to wastewater treatment plants all over the country and interviewed plant operators that were currently utilizing this equipment. This and other analyses led to our development of design criteria for which we would use to determine best value in the review of proposals for procuring this UV equipment. And some of this selection criteria included capital and life cycle costs, services support, as well as location of parts, which is very important, ease of access and maintenance, and as well ease of operation. So we looked into re-soliciting for supplier proposals, but we felt that it was not appropriate at this time for a number of reasons. First, the initial pre-selection process was incredibly robust. This again happened in about 2016. And we haven't seen much change in the overall UV industry and specifically with the suppliers that proposed on the project originally. In addition, the pre-selection process was most appropriate for the earlier stages of design in order to incorporate this equipment specific criteria. We are now closer to the end of the project, and so it would have delay impact. It would cause substantial delay to the project to re-release an RFP for proposals. And there would also be additional impacts to our regulatory process as well. So we did enter into an MOU with Calgon Carbon, which fulfilled a number of needs for the project. Again, we guaranteed the equipment price of about $4.7 million for 18 months. We established that the price would be included in all contractor bids equally. And we also included a provision for design support services for a not to exceed fee of $70,000. And this came in the form of a professional services agreement. And so this slide compares the original MOU in 2016 to our new MOU for which we are seeking approval. And you can see in the table on the left, the provisions of the original MOU and the changes that are shown in the new MOU provisions, or the new MOU. So the original MOU was a binding commitment between supplier and the city, guaranteed equipment price for a period of 18 months. It also established that no payment was going to be made at that time, but rather to be included in contractors' bids and to be funded prior to award of the overall construction contract. It also included, again, the PSA for design support services. So the MOU is largely the exact same as before, but we needed to include a new equipment price. As you see there, a price increase of about $1 million. We are now seeking to hold that price for a period of 22 months. And we need to establish essentially a new PSA for design support services, essentially the same services that were provided on the earlier stage of the project, but to get us to the construction phase. So this slide breaks down the $1 million price escalation. And the two key factors contributing to that price escalation were change of scope, which came about as a result of the value engineering study, as well as the pre-design processes, and a direct increase to component labor pricing, as well as sub-supplier costs between the periods of 2016 and about 2020 and thereafter. So about $416,000 was contributed to an increase of channel system control centers. Our original proposal included one control center that would operate all channels or all light banks. And by increasing the number of control centers, improves system latency and effectively increases the speed of communication between the central system and the operating system at the treatment process itself. That came at about a cost of $300,000. And then we also.
Thank you, Mark. Our next speaker will be Mike Turgeon. Mike, you can now unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Let me go ahead and get the timer up. Just one moment.
Thanks, Kelly.
Can you see the timer on your screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Please state your name for the record, and your time begins now.
Mike Turgeon, Friends of the Climate Action Plan. Good to have the band back together. We appreciate all the stuff you guys have been through for the last 6 months and are so grateful that you guys are in the positions you are. I just would like to hear at some point, and I'm hoping to be on the meeting the whole time, but I'd like to see if David could possibly, or somebody could bring back an update, perhaps, if there is one, about at one point the Climate Action Subcommittee had identified $1 million in enterprise and general funds that could possibly go to opting up to an Center for Clean Powers Evergreen program for some of its water heating accounts. And I know $1 million in this current climate is hard to come by. But at any rate, I would at some point, if not today, then sometime in the future at one of these meetings, get an update on where that lies. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Are there any other public comments? I don't see any other hands raised. We have one more. Michael, I believe.
Yes, that's correct.
Perfect.
Everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I think most of us are concerned about VMTs and the need to reduce those. And I'm a long-term cyclist. That's my main mode of transportation in the county. And I just wanted to know what your support is and encouragement is for bike pedestrian safe pathways that would encourage all levels and all ages. And for example, in a lot of cities, they're designating slow streets and closing off streets to make it safe so that more people can use their bicycles and walk to downtown. And it seems to me like that's a place where we could start, where it's low-hanging fruit and we have a good opportunity, particularly based on what we're facing with COVID. People are staying at home more, not traveling as much, but they're outside and they're on bicycles. But clearly, as a cyclist, the current paths as they're designed are really unsafe. And I really want to encourage you to prioritize separated bike paths that are safe for all levels and all ages. And I went over the 2018 bike pedestrian kind of master plan, and it sounds really good, but I don't know how that's going to be addressed vis-a-vis funding. And I know Measure M is up again. It's going to be very challenging. And I think it's, for non-auto transport, it's very underfunded. And so I'm just, I guess my question is one, what are you doing to support bike pedestrian safe pathways? And how are we going to fund it? Thank you. I'm all done.
Hi, my screen is telling me to talk, but I haven't been told to talk. So would you like me to start? I'm Diane Wheeler, a Santa Rosa resident. Oops, there goes the clock. And I'm coming to the meeting a little late, so sorry if this has been covered. I'm interested in hearing, and the climate emergency resolution was passed many months ago and was very integrated with the RCPA's efforts, and the RCPA has gone through some changes since then. And I'm wondering, and like to hear at this or another meeting, what Santa Rosa's now climate emergency resolution pathway forward is. The community worked on a lot of actions that went along with that resolution, and we've all had a lot of great conversation and meetings about it. And I just am looking forward to hearing what the plans are and how we can continue down that path. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Are there any other public comments? Mayor Schwedhelm, I see no further public comment.
And did we get any voicemail or e-comments?
We did not.
All right, thank you. Okay, moving on to item 5.1, discussion items, vehicle miles traveled. Mr. Goon, are you introducing this item?
Yes, giving this item will be, apologize, can pull the agenda here. We'll have Nancy Adams presenting, along with transportation planner, along with Chris Barney, senior planner from the Sonoma County Transportation Authority. Nancy, you're up.
Yes, Mayor Schwedhelm and council members, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So good afternoon. So, gee, it was back in January when we made our first presentation of vehicle miles traveled, and here we are 6 months later. Now it's actually a requirement. So a lot has happened in the last 6 months since we initially presented this item to the subcommittee. So, you know, we've actually established some guidelines, and we've been working with some training with our internal staff. So I'm gonna, and I know the subcommittee had asked us back in January to come back and give us a little more of in-depth kind of understandable version of vehicle miles traveled. So that's why we invited Chris Barney. He's a staff person with the Sonoma County Transportation Authority, and he's very knowledgeable, and I'm hoping that he'll give the subcommittee of what vehicle miles traveled is and how it relates to 743. So I'm going to let him walk through the lion's share of the slides. Amy Lyle is here to talk about the good news is, we've had a little bit of development that's come in since July 1. So Amy's going to talk a little bit about the applicants that have come into planning and economic development and how they are responding to any VMT requirements. So she'll share a little bit of that story. And then Rob Sprinkle from Traffic Engineering will also talk about mitigation measures and how we're going to move forward with that. And then I'll wrap it up. So we got about a 10 or 15 minute presentation, and then we'll open it up for the subcommittee to discuss. So Chris, you're up next. Thank you.
All right, can we go ahead and go to the next slide? And just to introduce myself, my name's Chris Barney. I'm from the Sonoma County Transportation Authority. And I've been working with VMT for a number of years. I actually maintain and work with the travel model and a lot of the data tools and resources we have at the authority, and have been working with staff here at Santa Rosa on calculating VMT. So I think this right here, Nancy just put together a short list of some dates associated with the process for implementing SB 743. So Nancy, do you have any comments on this before we dive into the discussion on vehicle miles traveled?
No, I think the only thing that I actually didn't mention in my opening remarks is that we actually have a web page that we devoted to VMT, and we did send out a memo to the full city council mid-June, just to give the council an update on where we are in the process. So I think those were the only two things that I forgot to include in my initial remarks. So I will hand it back to you.
Great, thanks, Nancy. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I'm going to be talking a little bit about what vehicle miles traveled is, what Senate Bill 743 is, a little bit about how you can calculate VMT, and then what kinds of resources we have available from SETA, and then city staff will follow up with a little bit about what they're doing and how that can be applied locally. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So what is Senate Bill 43? I'd like to start with a discussion about that. So this is a bill that was introduced a number of years ago that changes how transportation impacts are considered as part of the environmental review process, or the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. And basically what it does is it requires that a level of service, which is a metric that measures congestion, no longer be used to estimate transportation impacts in CEQA. The Governor's Office of Planning and Research was put in charge of coming up with some new guidelines and finding a new metric, and they determined that vehicle miles traveled would be the most appropriate metric for transportation, considering the state's greenhouse gas reduction goals and environmental goals. So next slide, please. So what is vehicle miles traveled? So vehicle miles traveled is much different than level of service. One thing to keep in mind when you're discussing vehicle miles traveled is you can't directly measure it or observe it. It always has to be estimated using traffic counts, using travel models, or other different derived data sources or methods. So with level of service, you could actually go out to a corner or a road segment and count cars and measure speeds and actually directly measure congestion and what was going on. So VMT, it's a little more circuitous to get to that metric. So VMT measures the amount of vehicle travel across an entire system. So it's not looking at specific points, and it can be expressed in total VMT or total miles that people are traveling in vehicles, usually per day. And it's usually expressed per person as well. So there are a number of different ways of slicing and dicing the final metric. So it's a measure of total travel and activity, not congestion. So how much people are driving and how far they're driving. And it's really looking at the big picture or regional impacts of travel and not localized impacts. Next slide, please. So how can we get it at VMT and how can we calculate it? So again, I just want to emphasize this one more time is VMT is not directly measured or observed. We aren't able to directly track cars and how far they're driving at this point. We have a few data sources that provide some pretty good data that are available to us now, but we can't go out and actually measure this on a road segment or an intersection like we could level of service. So we have to estimate VMT using traffic counts and road segments, using traffic models like the Sonoma County travel model that we maintain at SCTA, or using other derived data sources. So one source is the Highway Performance Monitoring System, or HPMS, that Caltrans maintains. And basically what they do is they collect traffic counts and information on roadways and do a simple calculation and provide citywide and county estimates of VMT. At SCTA, we've also been able to use something called big data or mobile source data that looks at movement of mobile devices and phones and application data and aggregates a lot of different data sources to provide estimates of travel flows, where people are traveling, how far they're traveling, scrubs all this data to make sure privacy is protected, and then is able to provide this out to agencies and different groups that are analyzing VMT and other travel movements. So SCTA is actually use some of this data to prepare a travel behavior study. So that's available on the Sonoma County Transportation Authority website. And I have a few examples of what that type of information looks like in a few slides, but that's one thing that we can use to, number one, calculate VMT and also calibrate and validate our tools like the travel model to make sure that they're accurately representing travel, including VMT. And then there are a number of sketch or spreadsheet type tools that use relatively simple equations to estimate VMT for different types of projects and development types. So next slide, please. All right, so VMT at the surface level is pretty simple. It's basically the number of miles a vehicle is traveling, usually per day or per time period. But for SB 743, based on the guidance we received from the state, it really needs to be calculated and estimated for more discrete trip types. So one thing that the state is directing us to look at are commute trips only. So people traveling from home and going to work site locations. So they also ask us to look at all home-based trips or trips starting or ending at home. And this is primarily to look at residential VMT and travel impacts. And then there are another type of trip called non-home-based trips, which are trips starting or ending at a non-home location. And these are things like going to lunch to and from work, stopping at the grocery store, making a stop at a grocery store or daycare center on the way home from work, or trips that aren't starting or ending at a home location. So these are all different types of ways of categorizing VMT for doing VMT analysis for SB 743. So luckily, the tools we have here in Sonoma County are able to report out on these different types of VMT. So we're in a good position to do this type of analysis here. So in the context of SB 743, the different types of VMT that are going to be required to look at different project types include home-based travel. This includes school trips, shopping trips, recreation trips, or any trips starting or ending at a home. And looking at this type of VMT is required when analyzing residential projects. When you're considering office projects or office-like projects, the state has recommended that we look only at commute trips that are traveling to those workplace locations. And then for retail projects, the state has recommended looking at total VMT. And the way their thinking goes here is if you put retail or these service locations in the right spot, you may provide a closer location to where people are living and reduce VMT and travel overall. Next slide, please. So I have a few examples of the type of information that we have to calibrate and validate our tools and help us calculate VMT. This is something from our travel behavior study that's using mobile source data to estimate travel within Sonoma County. And what we saw here is 89% of trips that start within Sonoma County stay within Sonoma County. So on a countywide basis, we're doing a good job of keeping people in the county for work, recreation, and school, and all sorts of other types of trips. So that's also the case in Santa Rosa when we do have specific information for the city in the final report. About 5% of total trips each day come into the county, about 5% go out, and then just under 2% pass all the way through the county. And most of this is actually happening on the Highway 37 corridor from Solano to Marin County and vice versa in the southern portion of the county. So next slide, please. We're also able to use this data to get a good understanding for how far people are traveling on their average trips. So one thing that really stood out, and you can see this for Santa Rosa here in the top middle part of this graphic, is countywide, 60% of trips are less than 5 miles. So there are a lot of opportunities here to shift a lot of these trips to more efficient modes like biking and walking. So that 60% is consistent with what we're seeing in Santa Rosa as well. So we can use this type of information to help us calculate VMT, but also to look at ways of reducing VMT. So next slide, please. And then we're able to look at average trip lengths by specific geographies. So you can see here, average trips in Santa Rosa are pretty much the shortest other than Sonoma in the county. So even though there's a lot of travel happening in the city of Santa Rosa, a lot of those trips are shorter than average trips in the entire county. So next slide, please. So at SETA, we're working hard and very closely with your planning and public works and engineering staff to comply with SB 743 and provide tools and resources to help them meet the requirements of this state action and legislation. So one thing we've done is we've created VMT screening maps. This is actually a live hyperlink, so I encourage you after this meeting to take a look at that. You can click on that underlined section there and take a look at these maps. But what we've been able to do is take information from our travel model and determine areas that currently already have on average low VMT for these commute trips and these resident type trips. We're also able to produce a number of different types of VMT estimates at the city level, at the county level, and we're actually able to go down to sub-area levels too. So specific locations within the city of Santa Rosa or other parts of the county. We use something called a traffic analysis zone, so we can provide relatively detailed estimates of what's happening in different parts of the county. We've worked with a consultant to actually produce a white paper on SB 743 implementation. So that's available on our website and provides some tips and some steps on what local staff can do to implement SB 743. Last year, we held a very well-attended VMT implementation workshop that focused on SB 743 implementation and mitigation. So a lot of your local city staff were in attendance there. We had attendance from the public and had a good conversation about how to implement this bill at that workshop. I already discussed the travel behavior study, so it's another great source for VMT estimates, origin and destination data, or where people are traveling from and going to, average trip lengths, and lots of other wealth of really good data in there. So the report itself is full of maps and graphs and charts that really tell a story about how people travel within Sonoma County, and we include some specific section or some section specific to the city of Santa Rosa in there as well. So we have that report available to us, and also a lot of background data that available as well. So we can do additional analysis using tables and tables of information from that project. And then finally, we're able to work with your city staff and consultants to do project level VMT analysis. So I think with that, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And I think I will turn things over to Nancy and Amy at this point.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. This is Amy Lyle, Supervising Planner with the Advanced Planning Team. And Nancy and Chris asked me to pop in here just to talk about, from a planning perspective, what we're doing and how we're working with applicants when it comes to VMT, because this is really where the rubber meets the road, I should say. So we've, as planners, have anticipated this change for many, many years. We've been working with Chris on providing comments to the Office of Planning and Research over time to really refine their direction and their guidelines on how VMT is implemented. So it was kind of a momentous day to reach July 1st and actually start implementing this work. But this slide just kind of shows a snapshot of the wide range of projects that we see here at the city. Of course, you're familiar. But the thing about these projects is they have been starting their application processes well before July 1st. So there are many projects that have anticipated this change. We have anticipated this change. And thanks to the work of Chris and Nancy and her team, we have really good guidance out there, especially for our traffic engineers and our traffic consultants that are really having to pivot in how they actually approach the traffic studies associated with these projects. This really does create a fundamental shift in how we review projects and how development is incentivized. We have talked about it for a long time through SB 375 and how we plan for city-centered growth and our priority development areas. But this is really the first policy shift that really incentivizes projects to locate in our priority development areas in the downtown core, because they really will benefit from a streamlining opportunity. So thanks to the screening maps that Chris has created, it's very clear to applicants when they can screen out and not have to do this analysis, or when they're located in areas of the city where there's not a large amount of transit, and they will have to not only do a traffic study and assess the VMT impact of their project, but also provide some type of mitigation. So if they're in an area of the city where we don't have transit headways or a smart station, the part of that mitigation conversation that we're having with them is what can their project do to either fund those developments or change their project in a way where it can reduce VMT. So I know Rob's going to talk about that a little bit on the next slide about how that actually occurs. And the mitigation conversation is still evolving. Most jurisdictions in California are not as far along as we are, and are all kind of coming forward with different types of mitigation strategies. And so we're going to continue to learn and watch our partners across the state and work with our applicants as well. So we've already seen a lot of innovative approaches to reducing VMT, many coming from our applicants. But we're also seeing many not have to go through this step because they are locating in our priority development areas. So the density is really occurring where our general plan wants it, where Plan Bay Area wants it, within these dense urban cores. So with that, I'll turn it over to, I believe it's Rob, to talk a little bit about mitigation.
Great, thanks, Amy. Can you go to the next slide, please? So yeah, Amy hit on a lot of the stuff that is really going on right now as far as the mitigation goes. I feel like we're in a pretty good position right now with SCTA is also working on a mitigation calculator, basically to help quantify some of the mitigation items that are listed here. So just going through some of these mitigation items, in order to reduce the VMT at locations that aren't screened out on the maps, there are several different things that the developer can do. They could incorporate electric vehicle charging programs. They could add bicycle parking, include traffic calming in their development, as well as in the area. They could provide bus passes, unbundled parking, implement bike share programs, and OPR, the Office of Planning and Research, they give many more different options that you could do to help mitigate from VMT projects. The one thing that we really need to do is, and what a lot of the people across the state are doing, is determining how to quantify that. So we could have a developer come in and say, we're really close to our VMT threshold, but we're not quite there. You know, how many bus passes do I have to, or how many can I provide to offset my VMT if I'm in a location that doesn't screen out? So determining those actual, quantifying those different implementations of the mitigation measures are something that we're still working on and striving to move forward. And again, working with SCTA, they are in the process of developing a calculator to help us to really kind of narrow down and quantify what those different metrics are. Next slide. So I think it goes back to Nancy to kind of follow up.
Yeah. Thanks, Rob and Chris and Amy. So council members, that really concludes our presentation for this afternoon. And this is just a link to the VMT site that's on the city's web page. So we're here to listen, answer questions, and be available. So I'll turn it back to the subcommittee.
Thank you, Nancy. So just for clarification, what information are you looking for from the subcommittee, or was this just information for us?
So yeah, I think it was really in response to the initial presentation that we gave to you back in January. And I think a lot of the information that you're seeing today is really what's happened in the last 6 months, which you didn't have that benefit of that information. So, you know, if there's any input or, you know, suggestions that the subcommittee would like to let us know about as it relates to, you know, implementing climate action activities, that would be perfect.
Okay, and is this presentation planning to go before the full council?
So I think that's a great question. I think we can certainly, as I mentioned earlier, we did a memo to the council back in June. So that would be, I think, a very good question, and I think staff would be certainly willing to make an updated presentation to the full council as well, if that would be the desire of the subcommittee.
Okay, let's bring it back to the council. Mr. Dowd, do you have a question?
I'd like to have staff tell us what is going on with the COVID-19 pandemic and shelter in home. It seems like any data that you're collecting or have been collecting for the last 6 months and maybe another 6, hopefully not that long, kind of muddies up all the factual stuff that's going on, because people aren't traveling what they used to do normally. And when the pandemic is over, I would presume you'll see vehicle miles traveled increase. So what are you doing about kind of this hiccup?
So I could respond to that. So actually, Chris Barney's colleague, Tanya Nareth, at the Regional Planning Climate Action Agency, she actually did a presentation, and Chris, you can chime in as well, that really looks at that very point about how vehicle miles traveled is being impacted by the pandemic. So I think that information is available, and Chris Barney, you can chime in if you'd like, but it does this shelter in place has really changed, how we move around, and which lies how many miles we travel on a daily basis.
Yeah, I can jump in if you want on that. So I think the good news, Councilmember Dowd, is that a lot of the tools that we're using are using data from pre-COVID. So the travel behavior study that I discussed used data primarily from 2017. So when we were seeing normal travel behavior, we also collected data for 2018 after the 2017 wildfires, specifically for Santa Rosa, to make sure we were capturing before and after for that period as well. So the tools are certainly looking at kind of your average standard conditions. But speaking to what Nancy mentioned, we have been tracking how COVID-19 has been impacting travel in Sonoma County and across California, and using some of these big data sources, looking at the movement of devices and movement of devices in cars and personal devices, we've been able to really see that there's been a sharp decrease in VMTs, specifically in March, April, and May, and things are inching up a little bit now as people start acting, traveling around a little bit more and maybe going back to work. And we haven't seen any recent data for July or June yet. So we'll be interested to see if things are kind of going back down again. But, for our long range planning right now, we're assuming that at some point, people will travel similarly to how they did before the pandemic. But we are especially considering, people's working from home activities, right? People have learned how to do this now. And so that may change things. People may be walking and biking more. So we'll definitely be looking at these different data sources and different research that is tracking how the pandemic is impacting travel specifically.
Thank you.
All right, subcommittee, any additional questions? Mr. Rogers.
Thanks so much, Mr. Mayor. So just a couple of practical questions on sort of how this is implemented. So the developer comes in with a project and they have to quantify how many vehicle miles traveled it is to job sites, for example. How do we figure out what an adequate vehicle mile travel calculation point is? So, for example, is the Costco shopping center, would that be an adequate one? What about like a corner market? How does the developer know how to do the quantification, and how do we look at that and see what that actually tells us about our community?
That's a great question, Councilmember Rogers. And I'm going to see if maybe Amy and Rob can tag team this as ones that on the development side or who works with developers, and Rob who's working on the mitigation.
Yeah, Rob, if it would be okay, maybe you could talk about how it's actually measured and what points we use from certain projects.
Sure. So if the project doesn't screen out, then, that's our first tool that we use to look and see if the project screens out. So if it screens out, if it's in a PDA or in an area that has a VMT that's less than 15% of the average, then it's considered to be not an impact according to CEQA. If it doesn't screen out, then those projects are going to be looked at on a case-by-case basis, and we're going to have to take a hard look at those to see what type of implementation measure we want to implement that we feel is fair for the size of the development and how close they are to meeting their VMT impact. So at this point, it's really a case-by-case basis that we're looking at each of these developments and looking to see what is reasonable for the developer to use to mitigate. It might be a number of bus passes for the if it's a residential type development that's going in, maybe providing eco passes for the buses would be a measure that we would use. but until we get to the point where we have that calculator ready, it's not 100% quantifiable. So we really are just going to be taking our best look at each individual development on a case-by-case basis.
So let me make sure I kind of understand a little bit here, Rob, if you can. So if I'm a developer and I come in with a project and my vehicle mile traveled assessment is 15% away from the average, then I don't have to do the full calculation and the mitigation. Is that correct?
Can you restate that one more time? I'm sorry. I mean, just
So
rephrase it a little.
similar to when we would look at traffic congestion, if there was a street that didn't meet a certain threshold for traffic on the street, they wouldn't have to end up doing the full traffic study that was associated with the project. What I thought I heard you say is similarly with vehicle miles traveled, if somebody is 15% below the average for vehicle miles traveled, they get screened out and don't have to do that level of assessment.
Correct. That is the threshold that we have adopted from OPR. That's their recommendation, is to use that 15% below the average VMT to screen out. And those maps that we provide on the link that Chris mentioned, those include those locations on all the different zones throughout the city. So the map basically indicates locations that are pre-screened. So those are already indicated. If they don't meet the screening criteria, then those are the ones that we would have to look at a more detailed VMT analysis.
Okay, and so for that 15% threshold, is it countywide or is it citywide?
That's using the city. I believe that's using the citywide average. And Chris, you could correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, so for residential projects, OPR allows a jurisdiction to use the citywide average or the regional average. So the definition of regional is a little ambiguous. So here in Sonoma County, we've used the county plus a little travel outside of the county. But for office and retail type projects, so non-residential projects, you're supposed to look at the regional, or in this case, the countywide average.
Okay. And I was just mostly curious because Santa Rosa has such a lower vehicles miles traveled for their trips, the 5.4 miles, than other parts of the county, that I was wondering if it would skew some of the results. And I am actually looking at the map. It looks like there are, the vast majority of Santa Rosa falls into that range, the 15% below the countywide average. So most of the city, it looks like, would not have to do this VMT calculation. Is that correct?
That is correct. And there's two different maps that are shown on there. If you go to there's a residential, the home trip, which Chris was talking about for residential. And then there's also the commute work trip. So they'd be for the different types of developments.
Okay. And then just over time, as this VMT switch hopefully reduces our vehicle miles traveled, that 15% threshold is, I would think, is going to move with it, right? That the average is going to get pulled down, which means it's going to get harder and harder to escape having to do some form of mitigation. I guess that's more of a thought than a comment.
Yeah, and I can jump in on that, Rob, if it's okay. And this is all based on the tools. So as we update the travel model and the maps, yeah, you're correct that as VMT goes down, those screened areas will, depending on what average you're looking at, if Santa Rosa is doing better than the county, it will probably get harder to mitigate and screen out projects.
Okay, great. Those are my questions. Thanks.
Thank you for that. I do have a question regarding that trip length distribution and the Santa Rosa number of 5.4. Is that a combination of the three different types of VMT, residential, office, and retail?
Yes, that's all trips. So that information is actually from the travel behavior study, where we actually we're able to get a 30 to 40% sample of movements based on these mobile devices. So that's work trips, that's school trips, shopping trips, all sorts of travel, starting or ending or remaining entirely within the city of Santa Rosa.
Okay, whole new language. Mr. Dowd or Rogers, any additional questions? All right. And Nancy or David, in regards to whether or not this goes to the entire council, I'll have conversations during agenda setting to see if we think that would be the most appropriate thing to do, or go the route of the memo that has been provided at other times. Is there any other information you had for us, Nancy or David?
No, I'm fine. Thank you, David. I don't know if you're.
No, thank you, Mayor. That's it. Thanks, Nancy.
Okay,
You're welcome.
Madam Host, we'll take public comments on this item 5.1. Would you facilitate that process, please?
Of course. We are now taking public comments on item 5.1. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you are dialing in via telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. Looks like we have Steve Bertelbaugh. Steve, I have given you permission to talk. Are you able to unmute your microphone? Steve, are you able to speak? Steve, are you there? I don't believe he's there, Mayor, and I do not see any other hands raised.
And no comments were submitted on this item?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll close the public comment on item 5.1. On to item 5.2, Mr. Goen.
Item 5.2 is a report of consideration of reusable and compostable foodware ordinance, and presenting this item is Joey Hinowitz, who is the Administrative Analyst for Transportation and Public Works. Joey, you're up.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? This is Joey.
I can hear you, Joey.
Okay, how you doing, Mayor and council members? Good evening. So I'm here tonight to present to you kind of a consideration of a reusable and compostable foodware ordinance. As you may recall, the catalyst for bringing this item before you tonight for consideration, review, and feedback was the Zero Waste Master Plan that was passed by City Council in January. And if you remember, there were 5 kind of focused strategies to try to achieve our overarching goals by 2030 of achieving 75% diversion from landfill, as well as reducing our pounds per person per day per capita here in Santa Rosa to less than 1 pound per person per day. This was obviously kind of one of the main strategies and the focus of one of those strategies. So that's why I'm bringing that here tonight. And just to kind of give you some context on those overarching goals of the 75% diversion and the pounds per person per day, less than 1 pound per person. Currently, we're at about 43 to 45% diversion currently, and we are at about 2.8 pounds per person per day in Santa Rosa. So we definitely have some aggressive goals to reach, and that is obviously the intention of developing this Zero Waste Master Plan. So without further ado, we can go ahead and move to the next slide, Kaylee, please. So just a little bit of background. We're all probably pretty familiar with some of this stuff, but production and management with single-use foodware specifically, and really any single-use plastic products, which are generally really only used once then discarded, has pretty significant environmental impacts. I'm sure you all have seen the articles or seen some of those kind of videos from the oceans and things like that. Second bullet point there kind of shows some of those environmental impacts, which are very serious and very significant. Kind of focusing and drilling down a little bit more on the single-use packaging and the foodware, which is really the focus of this potential ordinance here that'll be proposed tonight. And some of the localized data that we were able to find was in a 2011 study of Bay Area street litter that was found in areas from the San Francisco Bay. It was found that 67% of all the litter items that were counted, there was 12,000 of them, were single-use food or beverage packaging. So that right there kind of shows you that that is a significant portion of that waste stream. Next slide. Bringing it here a little bit more localized here to Sonoma County, you see generally the same amounts in the figure. In 2017 Russian River watershed analysis found of close to about a little over 2,500 litter items, that 60% were single-use plastics of some variety. And then you'll actually see them listed there. Those were listed in order highest to lowest. So plastic wrappers, plastic bags, styrofoam food packaging, lids, and straws were the most common items that were found in that analysis. A little more recently, our Santa Rosa Stormwater and Creeks team in 2019 removed 1,031 cubic yards of trash that were deposited into our storm drain system or in the active channels of our creeks. So we really want to try to do something to try to alleviate this trash from even getting to that point and do some kind of upstream investment in that. And I'll be detailing kind of some of those details a little later on. And just kind of a little word of mouth, I did reach out to some of our stormwater and creek staff, and they did let me know that polystyrene, commonly known as styrofoam, and plastic food packaging are generally the most persistent items that they find in Santa Rosa waterways here locally. Next slide, please. Just some more kind of data here to give you an understanding. 80% of marine debris originates on land, primarily as trash and urban runoff. As we all know, marine plastics can cause animal disease and mortality and have been detected in human consumption items such as fish, bottled water, honey, sea salt, and more. There was even a recent article that I was reading that they were finding microplastics in the forest, which is letting us know that these microplastics are not only in our water streams and in the ocean, but they're beginning to find them in the atmosphere and the air as well. So it is time, in my opinion, to kind of try to take some action on some of these items. I already mentioned the Zero Waste Master Plan was the central strategy behind this recommendation tonight. And really, as I mentioned before, the focus is going to be on the single-use plastic service foodware, which really that practice of giving that out to customers on a regular basis and encourages customers and food vendors to pay a little attention to the quantity and the amount of disposable packaging that they are consuming or giving out with the products that they're selling. Next slide. So how we got here today. Zero Waste Sonoma, formerly known as the Waste Management Agency here in Sonoma County, they have developed a model ordinance for member jurisdictions to consider for adoption. And that ordinance is titled the Ordinance to Prohibit Use and Sale of Disposable Food Serviceware and Other Products Containing Polystyrene Foam. There are a few that I know of. There are a few jurisdictions that have passed this. Sebastopol has passed it. I believe they are the only locality that has it actually effective. Windsor and Healdsburg have passed it, and I believe that Zero Waste Sonoma is continuing to work on all the other jurisdictions here in Sonoma County, working with them to try to get that passed. But the model ordinance, it addresses really 5 areas. It's really focused on polystyrene foam. So first one is it prohibits polystyrene foodware from being distributed by food and beverage providers. Prohibits the same from being sold in retail stores. Requires food and beverage providers and special events to use compostable or recyclable disposable food serviceware. That'll be accepted by Recology. And it requires food and beverage providers to provide single-use straws, lids, cutlery, to-go items, etc., only upon request. So as you know, if you go and get to-go foodware, from wherever, and they're generally going to put that in your bag to go automatically, this would make that upon request only. And then it actually encourages the use of the reusables, and I'll kind of further define that a little bit later on, some further information as far as the encouragement use of the reusables area. You can go to the next slide, please. So who would be affected with the Zero Waste Sonoma model ordinance? So those who sell or distribute disposable foodware and other specified products, including food and beverage providers, retailers, and special events, as kind of just mentioned. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at restaurants, bars, stores, shops, sales outlets, convenience stores, delis, grocery stores, faith-based organizations, and food trucks would all be included. And this ordinance would also apply to city facilities. Obviously, we want to kind of lead by example. And so we would also, if this was passed, we would apply this to our city facilities and also our special events that require a permit from the city of Santa Rosa. Next slide. So when we're talking about impacts, what kind of impacts are we looking to our local food and beverage providers here in Santa Rosa? So it would prohibit polystyrene foam food serviceware to be given away or given away to customers. That's going to be your styrofoam. It also eliminates the use of polystyrene foam and other non-compostable and non-recyclable items. To-go items would be available upon request only. And it does encourage the use of reusables. Food and beverage providers would be encouraged but not required to provide potentially a 25-cent takeout fee for any combination of to-go foodware that was provided. And it would be assumed that that money collected would be able to go towards the purchase of compliant disposable alternatives. So while it's not mandated, we do have that within the ordinance that we would be encouraging businesses to take that approach. Next slide, please. So there's not a whole lot of really big impact to retailers. As you can imagine, there's not a whole lot of polystyrene products that are being sold from these retailers, but the products that it would apply to, you kind of see there in the pictures. We're talking about the coolers and the ice chests that are comprised wholly of polystyrene, which you don't really end up seeing too much of those anymore anyways, and the packaging peanuts there as well. So those are kind of what would generally overall be the impact to the retailers that I find here within the ordinance itself. Next slide. Impact to city facilities and special events. It's essentially the same thing. So city facilities wouldn't be able to use disposable food serviceware that contains polystyrene foam. We wouldn't be able to purchase anything with polystyrene foam. The same would apply to our special events and contractors and lessees for any of our permanent events. And the same would apply for our special event promoters. So it would be applied across the board there as well. Next slide. So there is the ability for some exemptions in case of financial hardship, or if there's nothing available on the market at that point for a certain product. And that would go through the city manager or his designee, may exempt a food provider, special event, or retail venue, for up to 1 year. As I mentioned, if the ordinance creates some undue kind of financial hardship or there's nothing else available on the market, that would be a compliant foodware. But they must reapply at the end of that 1 year exemptions. And obviously it's not a blanket exemption. There are just some blanket exempt products, and those are foods prepared or packaged outside the jurisdiction. Disposable foodware that's compostable, recyclable through our local recycling programs. And then reusable polystyrene foam used for insulating or flotation purposes. Really, these are kind of more of your kind of pool or swimming accessories, surfboards, boats, life preservers, construction materials, craft supplies, and durable coolers that are not principally composed of polystyrene foam and are meant to be reused multiple times. Next slide. These are just some definitions of compostable and recyclable. I'll let you just take a quick look at that. I won't read it for you there. I'm pretty sure most of the folks here understand what compostable and recyclable are. But that is exactly what this ordinance would address, is that any disposable foodware would need to be either recyclable or compostable. Next slide. So that kind of wraps up the Model Zero Waste Sonoma ordinance. And that is kind of, I just want to stop that right here and let you know that that is the option that has been presented by Zero Waste Sonoma and is being presented to the local jurisdictions here in Sonoma County. What I would tell you as well is that I wanted to do some research and see really kind of what other jurisdictions, specifically in the Bay Area, but in California, are really doing to try to address some of these, single-use plastics and foodware issues, and kind of really see where the cutting edge was, and to see if we could even go above and beyond the Zero Waste Sonoma measure to try to have a little bit more of a bigger impact and a bigger reach. So I did do some research, and I found that the city of Berkeley was found to have really the most progressive and cutting edge single-use foodware ordinance. It is an ordinance that is implemented in phases to give businesses time and flexibility to transition. And the enforcement actually doesn't begin until after 1 year after the effective date of when that phase goes into effect. So it allows for businesses to be able to address the ordinance, to be able to actualize that the requirements of the ordinance, and to get those items put in place and give them plenty of enough time to be able to adhere to the ordinance there as well. And if there's any issues, they have opportunities to cure before there's any sort of enforcement. So we'll go into some of those details here next on the Berkeley ordinance. If you want to go to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, they do it in phases. Berkeley in phase one, kind of the high items here, high ranking items are similar to what the zero waste no more ordinance was, where accessory disposable foodware items should be provided upon request or at self-serve stations. These are, and what we talk about with accessory disposable foodware items, we're talking about straws, stirrers, napkins, utensils, condiment cups, packets, etc. One of the ones that I like as well in this phase one is the prepared food vendors that allow self-busing, so kind of dine-in service, and you're throwing away your own food. They must be provided color-coded receptacles for all three bins. So you need your blue, your green, and then your gray or your black for customers to separate the recycling, compost, and landfill waste, as well as signage must be posted above and or on each receptacle. One thing to note here on that second bullet point is, while this was instituted, about a year and a half ago in Berkeley, and I plan to bring it to the Climate Action Subcommittee here in the coming months, is an update on SB 1383, which is a short-lived climate pollutants law, which is really aimed at addressing methane emissions from organics, and really trying to push folks to be putting their organics into the green bin instead of their black bins at home, which is really accounts for close to about 40% of the waste that goes into our local landfill, which could be diverted. That is a requirement in SB 1383. And that really becomes effective in 2022. And myself, amongst others at Zero Waste Sonoma and here in Sonoma County, are really kind of working to address and understand that ordinance, or that law, SB 1383. And we're still waiting for a final language, which still has yet to come out. So we understand what the majority of it's going to be, but we're really still kind of waiting on that final language. But not to kind of do a tailspin off there too far. But what I meant to say is SB 1383 has that as a requirement, so we could potentially get in front of that. And it's really going to have to be something that restaurants and business owners are going to have to do regardless. And then lastly, under phase one for the Berkeley ordinance, it applies to foodware purchased by the city for use at facilities or city-sponsored events must be reusable or certified compostable by the Biodegradable Products Institute. And kind of really at that point, that kind of really gets me to the main difference from the Zero Waste Sonoma ordinance and the proposed potential ordinance that we can mirror off of the Berkeley ordinance, is that instead of the to-go foodware items either having to be compostable or recyclable, in Berkeley, they say that it has to be certified compostable. So it cannot be plastics, it cannot be a recyclable product. It has to be certified compostable by the BPI, which is the Biodegradable Products Institute. So that's really going to be the main difference you're going to see in the two ordinances. Next slide, please. So phase two, in Berkeley, they instituted this about 8 months after phase one, and all disposable foodware and accessory disposable foodware items must be certified compostable. So that's really going to be the big kicker there, as I mentioned. And similar to the Zero Waste Sonoma ordinance, prepared food vendors can seek waivers for certain items if they can demonstrate that no comparable certified compostable item exists, or if the cost will cause undue financial hardship. Secondly, here in phase two, Berkeley does mandate that prepared food vendors that are giving out a disposable beverage cup, a single-use disposable beverage cup, must show a charge of 25 cents on that on their itemized receipt. So charges for disposable cups must be identified, clearly identified on menus, ordering platforms, menu boards, etc. 25% charge cannot be applied to any reusable cup supplied by the customer. So that's really what they're trying to do, is to try to have the customer bring in their own reusable cup. similar to what you kind of do. Well, I guess you don't do it anymore, but what you used to do at Starbucks when you get your coffee in the morning and you bring your reusable cup. And there are some items there where there is some discretion on the restaurant side of things, where any unsuitable or unsanitary cups can be refused. So it obviously needs to be clean and safe for the patron and also for the business. And then customers demonstrating a payment card or voucher issued through some of those kind of government programs would be exempt from that charge. Next slide, please. And then finally, phase 3 of the Berkeley ordinance is instituted 6 months after phase 2. And prepared food vendors offering on-site dining may only use reusable, durable or washable food service or foodware to serve customers eating on the premises. So if you're eating on the premises, you cannot give out a single-use foodware. It needs to be something that's durable and washable and something that can be reusable. So this may either provide cleaning and sanitation facilities to have a contract if they don't have on-site dishwashing facilities, but it does have some certain exemptions for anything that would be certified compostable, like a paper tray or paper plate liners, wrappers, napkins. And then the recyclable aluminum is a little bit of the kind of specific exemption here where that is allowed for wrapping and forming items, such as burritos and wraps, and aluminum foil you can put in your blue bin, as long as it's not really food soiled. You can't put that in your blue bin and it will be recycled. So really kind of what we wanted to do is we kind of reformulate the way that we're looking at zero waste and the way that we're looking at this foodware ordinance to really try to maybe go above and beyond potentially what is even being proposed by Zero Waste Sonoma. And to get an idea, just on phase 3, I did reach out to Raisa to get some information on restaurants here in Santa Rosa. And as far as business tax certificates are concerned, we have about just under 500 self-selected restaurants that have put that information on their business tax certificate. So you kind of get an idea of how many premises this might apply to. And I think the majority of them really are providing reusable options already, but it would be interesting to do some more research to see kind of how many folks that would impact. Next slide. Oh, you skipped one, go back one. Thank you. So generally, what I was able to research and find is the average increase in cost to switch to compostable products is more or less about 8%. And this was found down below on foodservicedirector.com. It was a article about operations about the cost of going green. In the long term, a lot of these costs can actually be recouped with decreases in disposal costs, which is going to be obviously the most expensive portion of anybody's bill, specifically a business. There is the potential for these businesses to charge customers receiving to-go food serviceware or disposable cups 25 cents. So there is the option for the money, that investment to be recouped through a charge to the customers. And really the bottom line is reusables, kind of durable products that are designed for many uses are ultimately going to be the most cost-effective and environmentally friendly option. That is going to take some culture change, and it is going to take some reaching out to businesses to kind of lead the way on that. But that is really where the industry would rather have everybody go. Is reusables are best, compostables are kind of the next best, and then really kind of trying to push us away from the single-use plastics that we've come to see within the environment here locally and also around the world. Just one quick thing to mention. I wanted to mention this in the very beginning, but it is kind of an interesting metric, but also a scary metric as well. It was a report that found that plastic that flows into the oceans will triple by 2040. And without action, we're going to probably grow from plastic entering the oceans from around 11 million metric tons to 29 million metric tons over the next 2 decades. And that amount would weigh nearly 600 million tons, which is about the same as 3 million blue whales. And just to kind of also touch base on the, well, actually, I'll go on the next slide. Next slide, please. So a little bit more analysis on some of the differences between what Berkeley did and what we would potentially do here. And this is really kind of what I'd like to get from you guys tonight, is to understand where you'd like Santa Rosa to go. Do you like the zero waste Sonoma model ordinance, or do you want me to push further and try to come forward with an ordinance more in line with kind of what Berkeley's doing? But the reason I say that is because Berkeley does accept compostable plastics. And compostable plastics are not accepted by our local compost facility. So really what I would be proposing if we decided to go with this kind of second, more aggressive option, the Berkeley option, is that we would require all the items to be BPI certified, uncoated fiber paper products. So uncoated white, natural plant fiber, deli and parchment paper, paper napkins and paper towels, and 100% wood, bamboo, or palm leaf products that you may have often seen with some of the silverware products there. And then just a reminder, the BPI is the Biodegradable Products Institute. It's America's leading certifier of compostable products and packaging. I should also touch base on the fact that within the BPI framework, compostable plastics are an option on that website. So I would be requesting if the subcommittee wanted me to move more in this direction, that I would probably need to do a little bit more research to find out exactly how I would want to organize and present that material. Because if you go onto the website, which Berkeley says, anything on this website is considered compostable within our local facilities, since they don't accept compostable plastics for a variety of reasons. And really, compostable plastics end up sometimes confusing the customer because they look exactly almost like regular plastics. And so the argument is you're not going to really know the difference between one or the other, and it really confuses the public. And really, that's what we're trying to avoid. Is those are available on the BPI website. And so I would need to really drill down as far as, what would be available, what would some exemptions be? For instance, you have the lining in wet products. So any wet food, your coffee cups are going to have that lining because it helps protect the paper from, getting wet and dripping or getting all over the place. So there would need to be some exemptions that would need to be detailed within this potential proposal. So there would still be a little bit of work that would need to be done on my end if this is the direction that the council would like Santa Rosa to move forward. Next slide, please. So kind of wrapping this up here, we got the two models. We have the zero waste Sonoma model ordinance, which really is going to be removing polystyrene foam, which is number one thing I think we should definitely do right away. Styrofoam should no longer be an option for any to-go wear. And then the Berkeley model, which really says that this has to be certified compostable, or you can't even be recyclable. So kind of the main differences here are the Berkeley model is only going to be certified compostable with the certain exemptions allowed but must be approved. The self-busing and the 3 color-coded receptacles for customers that separate the recycling, compost, and landfill waste. The Berkeley model does direct prepared food vendors offering on-site dining to only use reusable foodware, or it could be compostable, or in those small instances, it could be for wraps and burritos. And then lastly, they do mandate that there's a 25-cent charge for every disposable cup provided. So those are really going to be the main differences between the zero waste Sonoma model ordinance and the Berkeley model. Next slide. And so obviously, as I mentioned before, I'm really bringing this for consideration to the city council subcommittee. I would say that if you folks think that we are good to go with the zero waste Sonoma model, my next request would be for me to bring that forward to the full city council here sometime in the near future, because that's pretty much kind of ready to go, and it has been a model that has been passed in other jurisdictions. So I kind of want to know whether or not you prefer the zero waste model or the Berkeley model potentially, which would go a little bit above and beyond. And I would be honest, I would probably need to tighten some things up on that model. And I would probably be requesting to come back and to present to you again on some of those further details. Obviously, right now we have some COVID-19 implications. Obviously, when this was passed in January, we weren't really fully aware of the situations that we were going to be dealing with this pandemic here. But as we all know, the rise of single-use plastics, face masks, gloves, to-go foodware, you're ordering from, Postmates. There's been a huge increase in single-use plastics since COVID-19 has started. And just to kind of give you some information on that, the problem is especially apparent in the restaurant industry and its increased reliance on food delivery services. Many restaurants, even those that were curbing plastic waste prior to the pandemic, are not limiting the amount of plastic involved in takeout orders for safety reasons. And to be honest with you, the plastic industry has actually seized on this pandemic as an opportunity to try to convince people that single-use plastic is necessary to keep us safe and that reusables are dirty and dangerous. And I'm not sure if any of you have seen, but I would encourage you to maybe check out a documentary that PBS put together. It's called Plastic Wars. And it kind of goes into the history about recycling and the fact that, the recycling kind of marketing campaign was more or less really started by the petroleum and plastics industry. The biggest plastic producers, we're talking about ExxonMobil, Chevron, Phillips, Dow, DuPont. They all profit hugely from the continuation of production of plastics. But what I would say is that the plastic problem is not going to be solved by education efforts alone, which is really kind of what they're putting the onus on is, consumers need to have better recycling behaviors, which I would argue against that. But I really think that it can be solved by preventing some of these hard to recycle items from ever being created and requiring producers to take responsibility for some of the waste products that they're creating. So I just kind of wanted to preface that. Obviously, I know that there are some COVID-19 implications right now for safety reasons. I don't think that should be a reason why we don't move forward on potentially a more aggressive ordinance. But I would say that we do need to consider that and maybe, put an effective date out, maybe a year or even maybe potentially 24 months, considering that we don't really know what's to come with COVID-19. So I would just also put that as a consideration. As I just kind of mentioned, that kind of also ties in with the implementation timeline. So interested to hear what you guys might think about, potential implementation. Level of outreach that you're looking for myself to do and the city to do to the business community on this. And really the next steps is going to be, as I mentioned in the beginning, if depending on which model you'd really like me to focus on, next steps would be if it's the zero waste Sonoma model, would be for me to bring that forward into the full council, sometime soon as they can get calendared. If you choose that you think the Berkeley model is really somewhere you'd like to see Santa Rosa go, which me personally, that's what I'm advocating for. I would probably recommend me tightening up some things, getting some things in order on exactly what can be, considered compostable here in Santa Rosa and what can be used and what can't be, and coming back to you with a little bit more of kind of a shorter but more detailed presentation on that potential model. So without that, I will open it up to feedback, questions, thoughts, input from the council members.
Thank you, Joey, for that thorough presentation. Nice job as always. Mr. Rogers or Mr. Dowd, do you have questions regarding the presentation?
Questions? No, I'll wait until after public comment.
Mr. Dowd, do you have any questions?
I would give the same response as Councilmember Rogers. I'll wait till after public comment. I do want to get some clarifications on this, on various things and strategies.
Okay, I do have a couple of questions. Joey, so you mentioned on the final slide, level of outreach. To date, has there been any outreach specifically to food and beverage providers regarding this potential ordinance?
At this point, there hasn't been any direct outreach from the city of Santa Rosa. Zero Waste Sonoma, obviously they handle this for the entire county. And so they have been doing some blanket outreach and blanket marketing on their ends and through their mediums. But as far as devoted Santa Rosa outreach, no, there has not been.
Okay. One of your slides talked about what was exempted, and it said food prepared or packaged outside the jurisdiction. Would that also be the case for the packaging? You mentioned packaging peanuts any of those shipping materials that were prepared or packaged outside the jurisdiction, would that also be exempt?
Correct. Yeah, and the thought process behind that is obviously we have no jurisdiction to or enforcement over anything that's coming out from outside of our jurisdiction. So the same would apply. Yes, Mayor.
Okay. And why are compostable plastics not accepted at our local compost facility?
There's a lot of discussion around this. The bottom line is that they don't break down in the amount of time for the compost is being developed. And ultimately, what ends up happening is you're still going to end up with essentially a little bit of a plastic product at the end life of it. And so it ends up being screened out before it goes into the composting process. Furthermore, it wouldn't be considered organic compost if you allow the compostable plastics. And organic compost resale value is much higher than non-organic compost. And so folks that are in the business of supplying compost, they don't want the compostable plastics in their feedstock.
Okay, so based on what I'm reading between the lines there, we're not anticipating our local compost facility to change their current practices?
We're not. There's been some more detailed discussion that's happened through the Zero Waste Sonoma board on this topic. And there was actually a really good presentation that was presented by Zero Waste Sonoma staff on the pros and cons of having compostable plastics. And the board, Zero Waste Sonoma board, chose to not potentially have that be an option here in our proposed local facility that is currently in negotiations for out there at the Laguna Treatment Plant.
Great. Okay, those are all the questions I had. Let's go to public comment now. Madam Host, could you facilitate the public comment on item 5.2?
Of course. We are now taking public comments on item 5.2. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you're dialing in via telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. Looks like we have Jenny Blaker. Jenny, I have given you permission to unmute your microphone.
Hello, yes. Thank you. Can you hear me?
I can. Let me get the timer up on the screen. Do you see the timer?
I do, yes.
Perfect. Please state your name for the record if you so wish, and you have up to 3 minutes.
Thank you.
And your time begins now.
Thank you. So my name is Jenny Blaker, and I would like to say thank you for a really interesting and thorough presentation. I went to the Zero Waste Symposium a year or so ago and learned a lot there that was really interesting. I think one of the major problems is that the public are really confused. And one of the reasons is that stores still sell things that are marketed as compostable when they're not in Sonoma County. And so people with the best of intentions buy plastic that is supposed to be, that is called or labeled biodegradable or compostable, thinking they're doing the right thing and putting it in the green bin, but it can't be accepted in Sonoma County, and that's a real problem. So really these things shouldn't be allowed to be marketed in Sonoma County. And the other point I wanted to make was just that I saw bamboo and palm leaves came up as 100% compostable alternative, but Recology doesn't take palm leaves or bamboo in the green bins. So that's it. Thank you very much for a great presentation. And I do also highly recommend that movie Plastic, documentary on plastic and the origins of plastic and the marketing by the fossil fuel industries. It's horrifying. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Do we have anybody else that would like to make a public comment at this time? We have one more. Sloan, I have unmuted your microphone.
Okay, great. Can you hear me?
I can. Let me get the timer up on the screen. Please state your name for the public record if you so choose. A timer is now on the screen and you have up to 3 minutes. At the end of your comment, I will mute your microphone and disable your speaker permissions. Your time begins now.
This is Sloan Pagal. I am a Zero Waste Program Manager with Zero Waste Sonoma, and I just wanted to add a couple of other comments to go along with Joey's presentation, and that is that within the ordinance, straws and utensils are considered foodware, so they would also be required to be a compostable option. And then also from the retailer side, kind of touching on the previous public comment, the polystyrene foam, food serviceware like plates and cups would also, I just wanted to reiterate that would also be banned from sale through the retailers. So hopefully that would at least kind of address that confusion from the consumer side, and also eliminate that channel of getting those products out into different restaurants for distribution. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Sloan. Celia Ferber. I have unmuted your microphone. Please state your name for the record if you so choose.
Can you hear me okay?
I can. A timer is up on your screen. You have up to 3 minutes. And at the end of your comment, I will mute your microphone and disable your speaking permissions. Your time begins now.
Thank you so much. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. My name is Celia Ferber, and I'm with Recology Sonoma Marin. I just wanted to say that it's been a pleasure working with Joey on his research for this presentation. He definitely did his outreach to make sure to present all the facts today. And Recology is in full support of whichever style of plastics ordinance you decide to go with. I do hope you will be adopting one of them. But we do fully support that. Like Joey mentioned, this plastics issue that we face, it's not something that we can necessarily recycle our way out of. At a certain point, you have to look at what products are available on the market and what products are being provided to people at restaurants. And we need to make sure that those products actually are compostable or recyclable. And that'll really help with making sure that we have clean waterways and that we can keep materials out of the landfill in general. So just wanted to say that we support this, and we're available for any questions that come up. And that's all for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Celia. Do we have any other public that would like to make a comment at this time? Mayor, I see no further public comment.
And confirm no emails or voicemails?
That is correct.
Great. All right, bring it back to our subcommittee. Mr. Dowd, your thoughts or comments?
Well, my thoughts are, it's overwhelming when you listen to the concept that these items that are not disposable or recyclable could triple over the next, whatever the number of years it was. It would say to me that we need to ramp up what we're doing with the products that we deliver food in and serve food in, et cetera, et cetera. That being said, I would like us to set a timeline out, 1 year, 2 years, whatever we can come to an agreement on, to ramp up our processes. And during that time frame, work with Zero Waste Sonoma and Recology and the other communities of Sonoma County, so that we can be more effective across our entire county. Those are my thoughts. I just can't agree that we don't do more.
Okay, Mr. Rogers, your thoughts and comments.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think, Dick, in previous meetings, the public's kind of gotten an earful from me on this as well, since I've been working on the single-use plastics issue for a couple of years now. And the two most striking data points to me, the first is that every single piece of plastic ever created is still in existence right now. It doesn't actually go away. It breaks down into microplastics. It gets into our waterways, which leads me to the second data point, which was that over 70% of breast milk that was tested found microplastics in it as well. So we're not just talking about an issue that's going to continue to get bad over the next couple of years. It's an issue that's already here, and it's one that's impacting the health of our community. So I am fully in favor of this. This is the main reason that we continue to push forward on our zero waste master plan. And to me, zero waste means getting to zero waste. So I would be in favor of being more aggressive than the model ordinance. And in fact, there are some things even in the Berkeley ordinance that I have questions about why they didn't push a little bit further. Extrapolating data is a little bit difficult, in the way that Recology collects data and our previous trash hauler collected data makes it sometimes hard to look. But if you look at the average amount of plastic bottles used, and that's water bottles, that's soda bottles, but plastic bottles that are used, and apply it to the Sonoma County population, that means that each and every year we have about 159 million plastic bottles that are being used in Sonoma County alone. When you look at single-use cups, which Joey mentioned, you've got about 78 million single-use plastic cups that are being used each year. So for me, I'd like to include those things in it as well. Yes, with an option for the retail provider to be able to charge if they need to, if they'd like to. But to Joey's broader point, when it pertains to especially climate issues, putting the onus on the individual and asking them to do things differently has not been an effective strategy. We need wholesale systemic changes, and that's what I'd be looking for in this ordinance as well.
All right, thank you for those comments. I would echo the need for this. My only concern with this ordinance and the timing of it all, and I'll equate it to the all-electric reach ordinance, 8% impact to the food and beverage providers. I don't think this is the time we want to impact that industry. And so I'm just struggling with the timing of this all. So I would be in support of as aggressive model as we can. But we have a couple other meetings with the city council, coming up on our priorities, August 3rd and 4th, to see if this is still council priority. And B, we'll have some discussions about what to do with settlement dollars. Because I think the city has now, we've done a couple things that are having some significant impacts with the food and beverage industry. And if we have a way to help them through some of these challenging times, Joey, one of the things you had on the last slide, the COVID-19 implications, man, I don't know, jury's still out on what those are going to be and when it's going to end. So the implementation, yes, I want to move forward on this. I'm just not sure if now is the right time. And so for me, I would like to hear what our other colleagues, before I schedule it on any of our future agendas, I'd be interested in hearing what our colleagues have to say next Monday and Tuesday about our council priorities, because again, I think that will set the direction, at least for the remainder of this year. Anyway, and so I'm interested in that timing. If I could hear from you, Mr. Dowd, and you, Mr. Rogers, about what are your thoughts, given some of the important things that we will be discussing at City Council. What are your thoughts on some of the timing of this? Mr. Dowd, would you like to start, please? It'd be helpful for me to hear your thoughts.
Well, I think your comments, Mayor, are absolutely spot on, that we need to commit to be doing a better job with our waste products than we are, and be very serious about that. And then during the goal setting, see what we can come to a consensus on with the whole city council about what timing ought to be and where we go. But I don't want to negatively impact our food industry and restaurants and other people. That being said, I absolutely want to ramp up our efforts and do it so that we can accommodate our communities and the other members of our council.
Mr. Rogers, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that economics are always going to be a concern on any climate issue that we talk about. But I think that that's how we've gotten to the point that we've gotten, where scientists are saying that we have a little over a decade for us to take meaningful action to actually be able to mitigate the impacts of climate change. COVID is absolutely not the right time in terms of an economics reason for us to be making these types of changes. But what you also heard from Joey is that now is when people are actually ramping up their use of these things because of the impacts of COVID. So I totally understand it. If we wanted to have the implementation date for an ordinance like this a year out, or even tie it to the emergency declaration that we have for COVID, that when our local emergency expires, that this ordinance can go into effect, I get it. But we have to start to do the outreach and the implementation of it and really create that cultural shift that we're talking about here with our waste streams. I'd also, again, bring it back to Joey giving us the option of having the retailers charge for these as well. If there was a way to build that in, then you actually would mitigate that 8% cost increase on the retailer. And instead you'd put it on the individual who needs to change their behavior if we're going to be successful with this ordinance anyway. So if that was an option that you wanted to go with, Mr. Mayor, where we started with that, when we start to implement it, I think that would also ease the burden on retailers in the short term while still doing something meaningful for addressing climate change.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful. And regarding the retailers having the opportunity or the ability to charge for that, since we haven't done any direct outreach to those retailers and food providers, I'd like to hear it from them if that would mitigate it. And that's the part where I'm a little hesitant, but I like what you had to say. So I'd also be supportive of when shelter in place, our emergency has been removed. If shortly after that, we could bring this entire item to the city council. Joey, would that give you an opportunity, since obviously we don't know when that is, but to do the groundwork and start doing some of the outreach and forming this ordinance with an non-specific future date? Would that be helpful for you and your team? Or Mr. Goon, if this is a question for you, I'm not sure.
I'll let Joey answer that question. I think that sounds like a reasonable approach, but Joey, I'll need you to weigh in on the team. I don't know if Jason Dutt's on the call as well.
Yeah, thank you, David. So I do think that would give me enough time. I do plan to do some outreach to the business community. What I would say is I kind of wanted to bring this forward to the subcommittee first, just to kind of temper your guys' feelings and understand where you're coming from. But from what it sounds like is you guys are pro for the kind of more aggressive ordinance, which I'll basically be creating an ordinance. I'll have a model ordinance for you to look at next time, which will be based off of the Berkeley ordinance. I'll get in line some of the issues that I found with the compostable plastics and what could actually really be accepted. And then I will do a little bit more outreach with the business community. I guess the only thing that I would say just personally is at this point, the Zero Waste Master Plan doesn't really have any dedicated funding. So I would need to maybe get a little creative as far as how I would go about that outreach with the business community. But I know that myself and Assistant City Manager Jason would be able to discuss that, and we would be able to create a path forward to alleviate some of your guys' questions and concerns with that, and to be able to bring back forward some actual knowledge and interpretation from the business community out there that would be impacted by this ordinance.
And Mayor, this is Jason Nutt, Assistant City Manager. Just to follow up on that, I think part of the issue here is the outreach component and trying to demonstrate for Joey's sake, what we think the subcommittee and council might really be interested in doing as businesses begin to rebuild, allowing them to have the knowledge as they start to rebuild their stock, as they start to rebuild their program, of where we think this is ultimately going will actually be a benefit, rather than having them build a program based around the product that potentially in a year or two we may be starting to phase out. So I think Joey's going to develop a nice ordinance, be able to do quite a bit of outreach, come back with a timeline that hopefully sets some implementation goals that are outside of what we hope is a relaxation of the shelter in place. It could at least be able to provide him with information that he can relay to the businesses that he'll be talking with.
And this is David. I just also want to support that as well with economic development is aware of this effort and is prepared to help support Joey and Jason through this process and connecting with businesses and through the various efforts underway citywide, but also countywide regarding economic recovery through COVID.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up countywide, Mr. Goen, because again, Santa Rosa, I think we can be a leader here, but it'd be wonderful to have the cooperation, participation from all cities. So again, for all of us, and many of us are going to be here on the 3rd and the 4th, once the council, at least for the remainder of the year, set our priorities, some of those resources hopefully would be available, but again, we're not going to know until council has that discussion. And again, just so for our assistant city managers, for me, the mindset is still where I 100% agree we need to do these things, but I'm also sensitive also with the way we implemented our all electric reach ordinance. Those folks that lost their houses in the Tubbs fire didn't need something else to impact their rebuilding efforts. And I kind of look at this with some of our downtown food and beverage industries that right now with COVID and the modifications we're making, I just don't want to throw something else on their plate until we're able to actually assist them. So with that vagueness, David and Joey, do you have enough information from the three of us for our next steps?
Yeah, I would say that I have enough information, Mayor. One of my main points was just to really kind of hear from the subcommittee of which direction you wanted me to go. And some of those other things I think will hopefully maybe become a little more clear as time progresses, especially with the situation with COVID. So I would say that we definitely have enough information to move forward and to come back with you to clear some of those items up in the future.
Great. Thank you so much for a very thorough presentation. Really enjoyed it, Joey. Okay, with no other discussion on 5.2, Mr. Goen, we'll go to 5.3. How do we want to?
There's 2 letters of support under 5.3, AB 1080 and SB 54. And Joey, are you going to talk about these items?
Yeah, this will be me again. Thank you, David.
Okay, sure.
So coming to you real quick, just to try to, bringing forward 2 letters of support for SB 54 and AB 1080. These are identical measures, and they actually go along the lines of what one of the community members was referencing earlier. It was Jenny Blaker, I believe, as far as, folks putting things on, saying this is compostable, or this is biodegradable, or this is recyclable. And this measure, these kind of dual identical measures actually aim at doing that. And just to kind of break down what it would do is these identical measures would direct the California Department of Resources, Recycling and Recovery, CalRecycle, to establish a comprehensive framework to address plastic pollution and waste. They would adopt by January 1st, 2024 that producers, which includes the people who manufacture single-use packaging or priority single-use products, to achieve 75% reduction of waste generated from single-use packaging in these products in California by 2030. It would require producers to source, reduce single-use packaging and priority single-use products to the maximum extent feasible. It would require producers to make single-use packaging and single-use products recyclable or compostable by 2030. And really kind of where the rubber meets the road is it would require that the development of criteria via an implementation plan with stakeholder input to determine which packaging materials would qualify to be labeled as recyclable or compostable. This implementation plan would also include the development of incentives and policies to encourage in-state manufacturing using recycled material generated in California as a way to shift towards more of a circular economy. And I know that Chris Rogers knows plenty enough about China's national sword, but I would really say that, for many decades, the United States model was to send our plastics overseas. And China was at a certain point in time, they were happy to take those products because it was cheaper and easier for them to use those, to reuse them and put them into secondary products and ship them back to the United States. With the Chinese national sword, they no longer said that they want to take Americans' junk and garbage, more or less. And so, the United States has essentially been kind of turned upside down and trying to figure out what now are we going to do with all this plastic that we create. So this measure would help to do that. Also, one of the very encouraging things with this measure is we're seeing a lot of these measures being made on the local level. Like I mentioned, Berkeley had their ordinance. I know the County of Marin is looking to do a similar ordinance that I just proposed. San Francisco, Long Beach, et cetera. But it's really encouraging to see this more on a statewide level. And kind of as we discussed earlier, we are going to need some of these higher governments, state and federal government, to take some action on extended producer responsibility. And really, that's essentially what these bills are. Is they are extended producer responsibility. It's making the businesses and the entities that are making these products to have some skin in the game and to be, somewhat responsible and to provide some funding to be able to deal with this stuff adequately, this trash and these items. The SB 54 and AB 1080 is supported by the California League of Cities. And so they are asking for letters of support. This almost passed last year in the 2019 session, but, I hate to say it, the plastics industry came in, was able to sway enough votes in Sacramento to push it off. And I just spoke to Derek Dolphy, who was the legislative analyst for the California League of Cities this afternoon, just to find out kind of where these bills sit. And they currently sit in both second houses of the House and the Senate. And so the hope is that these are going to be brought forward here within this session, which would end in before August 31st. So there has been a push by the California League of Cities to try to get, any cities in California that haven't signed on to this already to provide a letter of support. And that is essentially what I'm bringing forward to you tonight and asking for, your signature there, Mayor Schwedhelm, which I'll coordinate with the city manager's office if you guys choose to do so. Yeah, that's all I have on this.
All right, thank you, Joey. Mr. Rogers, did you have anything to add from your legislative subcommittee role?
Yeah, and Joey mentioned it. So from the Environmental Quality Committee for the League of Cities, we did already see the bills. We did already provide a couple of amendments and ended up supporting them as the League of Cities as a whole. And so it does dovetail very nicely with the discussion that we've already had at this point. And I do believe our council discussed and I think supported these bills last year as well.
Okay. Mr. Dowd, any comments or thoughts?
I think that we should go through the process of getting the required letters of support on these two bills. And depending on where it is, eventually it would probably come from a decision of the full city council.
Yeah. Well, for this one, if there's no objections, I'll plan on signing each of these letters of support and notify council as we do with previous ones. So am I seeing any objections for me signing these from our subcommittee?
Not for me.
Okay, great. Go ahead then, Joey or David, if you could have those prepared for my signature, that would be great.
Sure thing. I'll get them prepared for you and I'll have the city manager's office coordinate that for you, Mayor.
Okay, before we leave this item, Madam Host, could you check for any public comment on item 5.3?
Of course. We are now taking public comments on item 5.3. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you're dialing in via telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. I'm seeing no hands raised, Mayor.
Great, thank you. We'll move on to item 5.4. I'd like to first start this discussion from Mr. Goen or someone from your staff. Are there any items that this subcommittee has discussed that your staff are currently working on, or Mr. Nutt, before I check with my colleagues about items that they would like to add for future agendas?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I will kind of open the floor to Amy and Assistant City Manager Nutt. This item was put on the agenda before COVID, and the intention here was to try to get feedback from the community on the type of items that were of interest, provide a forum for the community to provide input to the subcommittee to help us figure out a plan of action for next year. Obviously, that's been delayed a little bit, so this is doing two things. One is hearing from you, the subcommittee, but also a chance for the community to weigh in on things that are of interest to them. And as you mentioned earlier, we are heading into goal setting next week, so that will be a big driver to determine where the level of effort and focus is over this next year as we move forward. So before I leave with this, I will offer to Amy if there's anything that you have off the top of your head that you're still on that you want to update the subcommittee on.
Yes, this is Amy Lyle. Just note we have Amy Nicholson and Amy Lyle, so
Oh, sorry.
I'll give it to Amy Nicholson too in case she has ideas. But I did just want to mention that we do have some upcoming items related to climate action that will be coming forward, and we'll be hoping to use the subcommittee as a touch point. So we are working on finalizing a scope of work for the update of the climate action plan based on your direction back in January. And so we do plan on folding that into our existing work with the general plan and awarding that contract to our general plan consultant. So that will be coming forward to the full city council in September. And in addition, you may remember we were selected to be one of 8 communities from EcoAdapt to do some workshops around vulnerabilities and climate adaptation. And that effort was put on hold due to COVID, but we have just discussed with them how to move forward and are planning to do the workshops and the work virtually. So that hopefully will occur sometime this fall or this winter, but that timeline really works the best for us for our climate action plan efforts and for the general plan effort. So there may be future agenda items that we would want to come back for just as a touch point as those processes move forward. And I'll see if Amy Nicholson has anything else to add on that.
Hi, this is Amy Nicholson. That was a beautiful summary. I have nothing to add.
Thanks. And I also want to provide an update for Assistant City Manager that if there's anything that operations is working on, you want to add in.
Yeah, thank you very much, David. Mayor and council members, we are in the process of putting together and issuing an RFP for a feasibility study relating to microgrids. We're focusing on 2 main campus areas for city offices and facilities, with a secondary component of energy audit relating to those facilities and potentially others. We're looking to take cost estimates in an A and B type of format so that we can segregate different components as needed. But given some recent information that we got from PG&E, looking at some programs that they're moving forward, we felt it would be appropriate to begin trying to understand better what our microgrid options could be for our city campuses. We will have some additional climate action activities moving forward, and we'll bring you more information as we get further in. In addition to, for example, we'll be buying our 4 electric buses here probably in September. We'll be making a recommendation and then proceeding on to potentially purchasing a fifth electric bus in early 2021 once our agreement with the state through the AHSC grant is finally approved. But there's quite a bit happening, and these are just the first couple of things that will be coming forward.
Great, that sounds good. Just because you mentioned it, and I forgot to mention it earlier, can you confirm, because my recollection, council, we're at 100% evergreen. Is that correct based on the budget decisions council made?
Yes, council approved the shift of both the general fund facilities and the Santa Rosa water facilities moving from the Clean Start program to evergreen. And so team members have already coordinated with Sonoma Clean Power and PG&E, and that work is underway with, I believe, next month, or I actually think it's this month is our first month being billed at the evergreen rate.
Great, thank you so much. Mr. Dowd, Mr. Rogers, would you like me to take public comment first, or do you want me to start with you two?
Whatever you want to do, Mr. Mayor.
All right, well, let's start. Mr. Rogers, why don't you go first?
Okay, I think a lot of this is going to be dependent on the goal setting and talking to staff specifically about what their capacity is. I'll throw out a couple of ideas on things that I'm interested in seeing us discuss and work on. And I think that some of them actually could end up being absorbed into the discussions around the new general plan. For example, I go back and I look at the different categories of greenhouse gas emissions that we see from our analysis, and then look at tools that other cities are using to try to mitigate some of those impacts. And one of the things that we have not discussed much in Santa Rosa that I think that we should is green roofs. So green roofing and active roofs would make our heat centers, particularly downtown, potentially cooler. And I think adding in active roofs into it as well would create some of that vibrancy that we've talked about for our downtown plan, and perhaps it's something that we can talk about with our general plan update as well. So I want to put that out there, green buildings in general, and sustainable building infrastructure. I have heard from the public that they'd like to have a discussion about new gas infrastructure, a ban on new gas infrastructure. I'd throw that out there as well. We had discussed potentially a carbon sequestration program, so I'll throw that out for discussion. And then ultimately, as was sort of discussed in the budget hearings, I would like to see Santa Rosa modernize our user utility tax and put those dollars towards implementing our climate action programs through this committee, or creating renewable energy opportunities for our city. So I'd like to see us discuss that as well.
Great, thank you. Mr. Dowd, anything you'd like to add to our future agenda list?
The two things that kind of stuck with me is that I would like to have ongoing development of our microgrid systems within the city, and work very hard so that that doesn't become a backup for diesel generators. We need to look at it across the board so that we don't go backwards in our GHGs as a community. And it's a complex subject, and it'll take us some time to work our way through it. And then the other thing I would like to work on together is even greater efforts on electrification of the city's vehicle fleets. And the last thing I'll say is I'm absolutely delighted that the city, this council voted to go evergreen. It's a very important step, and I'm proud that we're doing it.
Great, thank you. I don't have much to add to that because I know there's a lot of efforts. For me, it's always the public transportation, and do we go rate free to try to get people out of their cars and onto public transportation. But with this list, and after we hear from members of the public, I'll be touching base with Mr. Guin to prioritize some of these, because again, I think a big data point will be what the council decides on our priorities on August 3rd and August 4th. So thank you for your input on that. Madam Host, would you like to facilitate public comment on item 5.4?
Of course. We are now taking public comments on item 5.4. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you're dialing in via telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. All right. We have Jenny Blaker.
Hello, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you to Councilmember Rogers for mentioning new gas infrastructure. As I mentioned earlier in public comment, there are 2 proposed gas stations that we know of coming up in Santa Rosa at the moment, and we're hoping that you may be willing to help to oppose those. But more broadly, we would really like it if you could look at an ordinance for restricting new gas stations in the city, so that, for example, and we have a list of policy points which I'd be very happy to send you, so the policy would be about aligning with existing city policy on climate action, because new gas stations are contrary to the climate resolution. Santa Rosa already has an overabundance of gas stations. So, for example, not having new gas stations within a 5-mile radius of an existing one. Public health hazard, not having a new gas station within a certain distance of school, multifamily residence, daycare center, senior housing, hospital, etc. Incidentally, I noticed earlier on one of the slides that the staff produced, it showed, it mentioned Middle Rincon Crossings, which I believe is affordable housing, which is being planned right next door to this proposed 7-Eleven gas station, and that doesn't mix. Then there are all the environmental impacts to air, water quality, and soils, to wildlife habitat and sensitive species. It's a waste of city time and resources to be having to process each individual gas station. Why not just have a restriction that makes it very hard, unless there's for some reason, a real need to have a new gas station. At the moment, there's no demonstrated need for any new gas station in Santa Rosa. And instead, we should be, as you said, supporting pedestrian, bicycle facilities, public transportation, and electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So we'd like to suggest and request that you help us to formulate an ordinance restricting new gas stations in the city of Santa Rosa to take to the city council. I'm happy to, I will follow up with emails, in fact, sending you the wording for these policy points, which were put together by the Coalition Opposing New Gas Stations and representatives of Friends of the Climate Action Plan and 350 Bay Area. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Our next speaker will be Mike Turgeon, followed by Mark Mortensen. Mike, I have unmuted your microphone. There's a timer on the screen. You have up to 3 minutes. And at the end, I will mute your microphone and disable your speaker permissions, and your time begins now.
Thanks, Kelly. This is a question, and I know generally you don't answer questions, but it's a point of clarification, Mayor. You see the goal setting sessions are listed on the Santa Rosa City website, and they have August 3rd at 5 p.m. and August 4th at 10 a.m. And I just wanted to see if that's correct before I send out, an invitation to folks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
Mark Mortensen, please unmute your microphone. A timer is on the screen. You have up to 3 minutes.
All righty, thank you. Again, it's Mark Mortensen, Friends of the Climate Action Plan, and I've got two items to suggest about moving forward on. And even before I mention them, I just want to echo, agreement about the gas ordinance and getting something to make it so that it's really incumbent on great proof of need to bring in another gas station. But moving quickly on, I've got two suggestions for moving forward. First one is reprioritizing public information and education about the climate situation, about the climate crisis. Friends of the Climate Action Plan has put forth a list of climate actions, and on the number one is community engagement, community education, helping our community members become more familiar with what's going on and enlisting their support in making things happen. I think that with all of the support in our community, we could help with that capacity situation. You know, with the city, we've got people who can add to that capacity, who would help on a volunteer basis. So prioritizing public information and education. Second one is something that I've been working on for a while, a proposal that I've written up, and it involves regenerative soil. I'm suggesting that our city embark on a regenerative soil and land management sequestration program, something that would, there's been a lot of work done on reducing emissions, and that's important work, but we need parallel efforts to sequester carbon. And they're the only way that, between the two of them, sequestration is going to be needed to achieve net zero emissions, especially within the 10-year time frame that we've been talking about. So I've got a lengthy proposal written up involving, and it coordinates with RCPA's Climate Emergency Mobilization Strategy Framework. It's Policy 7. And I'm hoping that, the city will work with our CPA on that framework. And, Policy 7 focuses on sequestration. So greater use of compost to help rebuild soils, the use of biochar, and something called enhanced rock weathering. Oxidation can draw down carbon. Incentivize the use of permeable pavers and other permeable materials. Any number of other actions that could be taken to help sequester carbon. And I've got a lot more on this. I've been working on it for a while. We've got experience in biochar in the area, and I'm happy to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Are there any other citizens that would like to make a public comment on this time? Mayor, I see no further public comment.
All right, thank you for that. So I think we have all our information. Again, just to clarify, since I've mentioned it a couple of times regarding our city council goal setting, on August 3rd, Monday, August 3rd, we'll be starting at 4 o'clock. And August 3rd is designed for public comment. So council will not be having discussions. We'll just be receiving public comments starting at 4 and going until we received everyone's comments who wants to provide us that information. And then the council will be starting on Tuesday, August 4th at 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock, we will start our session about working through the prioritization of that. Okay, and again, as I mentioned, just for my two fellow colleagues, I've been keeping track of the list. I'll be looping out to Mr. Goen to prioritize those. And again, after we hear what we hear and decisions that are made on August 3rd and 4th, then we'll start crafting our next Climate Action Subcommittee agenda. So we have no subcommittee reports. We have no additional department reports. Nothing else on the agenda. We will now adjourn this meeting. Thank you all for your participation.
See you, everybody.